Hello, welcome to It's About Youth. I'm Saraya Mia. Now, Malaysia's inflation rate hovers between 2.5% to 4.5%, with the rate being recorded at 4.5% in September this year, while the food inflation is at 6.8%. Although the inflation rate is relatively contained, if you pay attention at the price hikes, especially in the food, beverage, and transportation costs, you'll actually see that the price hikes are actually much more than the numbers there. So how are these rising prices actually impacting the youths? And what does this mean to politicians and policies as we look ahead at electing members of parliament in the upcoming 15th general election? Now we'll be speaking with Arinah Najwa Ahmad Said, who is a public policy analyst from BowerGroupAsia, as well as Wong Chen, who is the incumbent of the Subang parliamentary seat. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so now youths are already grappling with underemployment, low wages and lack of high income job opportunities. And then now they have to deal with inflation. What does this actually mean to their futures?
Well, youth are struggling with inflation like everybody else in Malaysia. But if we define youth as a category of, say, between 18 to 30, different categories have different challenges, of course. If you're 18 to 21 or 23 even, you're most likely staying with your parents, you're not married, and in the age group of 25 above, you just got married, or maybe not, but you may have a child even. So for these kind of different categories, they have different challenges. For those between 18 to 23, they're probably living with their parents and they're living off the expenses, and these expenses are covered by the parents. So the parents feel a lot of pressure on food and accommodation, on transportation. As for the older group of the youth category, they are directly hit. And I think the core issue is inflation, of course, but really is the underpayment or the lack of money that they have. The wages are too low, they're underemployed. So therefore, their impact is double. They've got inflation up and their wages are very low or stagnant.
Yes, definitely something that we can see if we speak to people on a daily basis. Of course, this low wages is a massive problem that Malaysians are going through right now. So now, if we look at some of the major coalitions' manifestos for the general elections, PH actually promises to create jobs in the field of modern agriculture, renewable energy, sports economy, as well as esports. PN promises 1 million high-income job opportunities in the next few years, whereas BN had a slew of initiatives with the one family and one skilled worker policy with cash injections from governments and foundations. So, Arinah, what do you think about these? Are they achievable?
I think you can look at it from two perspectives. I think within the short term, cash injections are probably the immediate solution, because if you look at high income jobs, these things take investment by the government. So this will involve relooking at the syllabus in universities, also trying to look at what kind of jobs that we have within Malaysia, because we can't also just be talking about let's have high income jobs, but that does non-existent within the country. So there needs to be two-pronged approach. So what is the short-term solution, so that at least right now we mitigate underemployment, because there's also been a challenge where a lot of people just prefer going into the gig economy because it pays more. And I think that's a big of a challenge, especially if you're looking at, agriculture sector, where a lot of the people have left the agriculture sector because they find it more lucrative to go back into the gig economy. Plantation sectors were struggling because they couldn't afford to go and pay their workers. So it's really short-term solution. Maybe cash injections could be the solution, really trying to encourage local employment, especially in sectors like agriculture. If you're looking at the long term, then we really need to look at what is our blueprint for the types of sectors that we want to go into, the type of sectors that we can leverage on, and really rechanging what we're teaching in universities, or at least upskilling in universities. Yeah.
Understood. Now, of course, all of these require policies by lawmakers, and then I want to try to link sort of these daily life issues with Parliament and with members of Parliament, because you were a member of Parliament. So, Wong Chen, a poll actually recently revealed that over 1,000 Malaysian respondents, young Malaysian respondents, want to vote in this GE15 because 24% of these young respondents wanted to vote because they want to keep their MPs accountable. Now, youths now are becoming more aware that this is not just a sort of pre-election where the politicians sort of promise certain things, but it's more of like an ongoing job throughout the next 5 years since they are elected. So how can you actually say, or what is your take on how the rakyat can actually make sure that the MPs will do their jobs?
That's actually quite simple. The first thing the youth need to understand is they need to understand fully the scope and responsibility of an MP. And then from understanding their job scope, then you can go to the next step of making them accountable to their activities. So the first thing you need to understand is the MP is not the local government. Okay, it's not looking after your taman, your roads or your longkang. They're not looking after development issues in your local community. That's the ADUN's job. That's land matters, forestry, mining, approval for buildings. Those are the state government jobs. The Member of Parliament has only 3 broad jobs. The first one is to go to Parliament, just attending Parliament, debate in Parliament, right, and pass laws. So what you want to do is, these young people out there, please take a notebook, write down how many times your members of Parliament go to work, and how many debates have they done, have they interjected anything, or they've just been going to Parliament and not doing anything. Unfortunately, a lot of members of Parliament have a poor attendance rate, not 100%, right? So look at that first. Second thing is the Member of Parliament is supposed to develop policies, dasa, economic policy, political policy, social policy. These are developed through their speeches, their participation in the select committees. Yeah. So ask your Member of Parliament, have you served in any select committee? Are you in any special, groups? Are you attending human rights functions? Are you going to climate agendas? Are you, negotiating or talking to NGOs? The third is the budget. That's the most important to me, right? Because the budget is the period of October, November, December. For about 2.5 months, members of Parliament are supposed to look and scrutinize the budget for every single ministry. You must be adept, because that is the core responsibility of the Member of Parliament, to understand the budget, to question the budget, and then, if need be, approve or reject the budget. Because the budget sets the economic agenda for the next year that is coming. It sets the agenda of our national debt, sets the agenda how to develop an economic growth model, right? If there are corruption issues in the budget, they're always hidden there somewhere. Question those things. So I think this is it. My advice to all young people out there, you want to make your members of Parliament accountable to you, understand what is their job scope, take a little report card and just take away. Yeah? Don't say, "Oi, YB Wong Chen didn't come down and fix my longkang." Unfortunately, it's not my job, right? So please, understand, then easier for you to track the progress of your Member of Parliament.
I like that point where we have to understand first, and then thanks for pointing that out, actually, Wong Chen. And he also mentioned, on creating policies and sort of whatnot in Parliament, right, and debating them. So, Arinah, I want to ask, as Malaysia heads to the poll this 19th November, of course, with inflation in mind, what kind of policies are we looking at, perhaps right after GE15?
I think any government that comes into, who wins GE15 will have a tall order, to fulfill, because in any country they're facing a similar issue, right? So I think the thing with Malaysia is, number one, it's going to be jobs. So it's going to be jobs and employment, and also tackling underemployment. As Malaysia, or as the global economy also enters into a more conservative outlook, with more predicting recessions, companies are laying off. We've seen stories of companies laying off a lot of people, and that will definitely impact Malaysia. So I think the question on people's minds is jobs, right? So the other thing is also obviously cost of living. So we talked about inflation, yes. Granted, Malaysia is not as bad as other countries, but it's still very, very expensive, especially for those working in urban areas to live, because food is expensive. You're not even accounting things like medical bills now, especially when when people dealing with long COVID. I'm not sure if we have a strategy to deal with that. Also in childcare as well. So these things are all going to be very expensive. So these are the main issues that people are going to be looking at. What are the things that impact me directly? If we're looking at even other areas like climate change, it's already starting to seep into our daily lives as well, disrupting what we do. So even when we go to work, We can't go because dah banjir. You know, everything is struggling. That means I have to add more cost onto my car insurance. I have to include flood insurance, for example, because my LRT is broken down for 1 week, right? So it's a lot closer to home than we think. So it's going to be cost of living and also employment. Unfortunately, some people may not be thinking, you know, longer term in terms of geopolitics. Where do we stand with China? That's not what's on people's minds now. But it's really going to be what is directly impacting me at this moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Still on the topic of, you know, the rising cost of living. Just speaking for the youth, you know, like a lot of people are kind of unsure, you know, with inflation, should they, you know, invest, or should they save, or should they spend cash? What's your advice?
My advice, if you are young and you're like, you know, 18 to 25, you probably have very low paying job. You know, even if you come up from Oxford or Cambridge, you're not going to get a job that pays you above 5,000 ringgit, right? Most of you will be stuck in that 2,000, 3,000 bandwidth. So you actually don't have any chance for savings. Yeah, I would advise just try to control spending a bit. Just survive. When you're in your second half of your 20s, you know, if you're 25 to 30, you should try to save about 1,000 or 2,000 ringgit a month, if possible, and then try to invest. Presumably, you're getting a $6,000 pay job or $5,000 pay job, right? We know per person you need to spend about 2,007 average. Yeah, this is the Bank Negara report about living wage, right? If so, you're earning 2,007, you could possibly save 1,000 or 2,000 a month. Save it. I think it's always still a good bet to buy property. Yeah, even at a very young age. Don't buy a car. You drive out the car showroom, you lose 30% of the value immediately. So many of these things can be, you know, you can ask financial experts, go online and see what these people are advising you. I'm not going to give you financial advice, right? But if I could pick up on the issue about inflation, I think the next government that comes in has a few things to do. The most important thing is to save money and prepare a pool of money. That means we have to cut corruption. We've got to cut wastage. But more importantly, inflation is caused by a few factors. But one of them is the weak currency. That drives up inflation. So the new government must prepare for the GLCs and GLICs to repatriate money back to Malaysia to defend. And at the same time, Malaysian people should not take our money out and put it in Singapore. If you sell the ringgit down, you're going to create more inflation. So we will require Malaysians to be a bit more patriotic. But patriotic citizens require clean politicians to lead. So, you know, it's a bit of both, right? So what you want is a clean government, a government that's ready to pull back money to defend the ringgit, but at the same time people feel assured that the government is clean, therefore they do not send the money out and defend the ringgit. And that's where we can try to contain inflation.
Economics and Politics 101. We're going to talk more about housing affordability right after the break, so stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to It's About Youth. I'm Saraya Mia, speaking to Wong Chen, the incumbent of the Subang parliamentary seat, as well as Arinah Najwa Ahmad Said, who is a public policy analyst in BowerGroupAsia. Now, Arinah, I want to talk about housing affordability.
Yes.
Yeah, so the rising cost of living, as we know, on top of the underemployment, low wages and whatnot, is making it harder for the youths to afford property, or to buy property, basically. So what kind of policies are needed to kind of make housing more affordable for the younger Malaysians?
I think one, maybe I slightly differ from YB Wong Chen. I think there's a lot of pressure for younger groups to enter and buy houses.
Okay.
Currently, given wage stagnation, entering into large loans can be quite scary for a lot of people.
Especially with the inflation rate.
Especially with inflation rates, and especially with central banks increasing their OPR increasingly again next year. So the cost of borrowing is going to increase, and especially with so many other commitments, because like it or not, even though a car is is probably not a great investment. It's unfortunately necessary because we are not a very public transport friendly society. So I think one is the discussion of the notion around buying a house. I think that needs to be managed and discussed in a little more nuance rather than just saying you have to buy a house.
Right.
So I
More
think that's
education
one.
there.
Yeah, because a lot of people now, they feel that when they get their gaji or when they get their wages, I'm going to straight go and look at houses, I'm going to buy it, I'm going to see what's more affordable for me. I think that needs to be managed a bit more. So I think that's one. Second is, granted, there are existing initiatives already. You know, you have Rumah Whip, for example, that have affordable housing, you know, schemes. I think banks have a larger role to play here to help, you know, facilitate and give better, you know, rates, for example, easier installment plans. But second is also a better discussion with the government or local government with the developers, because right now there's been such an influx within urban areas. It's becoming very crowded. People are moving higher into taller buildings, more congestion rather than moving out a little bit more. But obviously this discussion needs to be a bit more developed, where you have to move jobs to outside of KL or central areas, right? Because it leads to all of these things, you know, worse congestion, worse traffic, worse quality of life. So when we talk about housing affordability, I think we need to tone it down maybe a little bit more. I think maybe there's still a prioritization or, you know, towards developers to push and develop, but we see a lot of developments that are just ghost-like houses because foreigners also come and buy in, they inflate the price, but they never stay. So I think there's also needs to be management of foreign, you know, people, or no, foreigners buying houses here. Maybe there should be, you know, re-looking at and stock taking what the kind of developments do we have, who are the owners, and then can that be redistributed to Malaysians rather than just being repatriated like YB talked about.
As you mentioned, you know, like this management of this
Yeah.
sort of the housing industry. Where does Parliament kind of come in play? Like, what sort of policies do you think that could sort of help the Malaysians in terms of housing affordability?
Okay, well, the knee-jerk reaction of most politicians is to say that we build more low-cost housing, right? I'm not a keen supporter of that, generally. Imagine, say, a low-cost house today, I think is in the range of 75,000 to 100,000. It's very heavily subsidized, right? The subsidy could be around 50,000 or even 30 to 40,000. I think by simple calculation, there's about 1 million demand for 1 million affordable houses. So if you put in 50,000 per house, you know, you're looking at essentially 50 billion easily. A pool of money that is not affordable. I think what you should do, and you can't build 1 million houses in, say, you know, 2 years. That's not possible. You're not. I don't think China can build that as well, right? So if you do a public housing scheme and you're building all these cheap houses, right, they tend to turn out into slums within 5 to 10 years. That's another problem altogether. So we're looking at it wrongly. It's almost like getting a lottery when you get a prima house or a low-cost house assigned to you. I think the better way by far is to use some of this money, provide for that 2-3% of the population that really direly need public housing. Yeah? Not the B40 entire group. You know? Instead, you'd look at the B40 and say, look, what do they really need? Affordability is a two-way traffic. One is the houses, but the other factor is their income. Take those money, that 40 billion you could save, put it into their income. When their income rises, they can choose to buy a medium cost house. Somewhere in the range of 200,000 to 300,000 or 350,000. That's better. That's 1,200 square feet or 1,000 square feet here in KL, right? You don't want to provide 650 square feet houses where it will, you know, it will become decrepit after 5 to 10 years, right? So I think we have to rethink the housing policy. Yes, 2-3% of the population, they are vulnerable. They are, you know, for whatever reason, maybe they're addicted to drugs or alcoholism, or they just got very bad luck, or they are, you know, extremely disabled. They can't get out of their rut. We have a social responsibility to provide housing for those. But beyond that, let's go and focus on the wages of the people. Then let them decide what is affordability, what kind of houses is best for them. And those best houses for a young startup family, you know, 1,000 square feet. Yeah? 250,000, 300,000 cost.
Yeah, I agree with the point on the wages because like, not only the B40s are impacted, by the
M40
problem of,
too.
M40, yep.
housing affordability, but also M40s, and that group is definitely large in this day and age. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about education. That's a very important topic as well. So let's just perhaps touch on one of BN's manifestos is to reduce the cost of education, and also including free higher education for the B40 groups. Arinah, how do you think that this sort of pledge could be made into reality? Like, is it feasible?
I think one is the question comes in of whether or not can we afford it. Because currently education in Malaysia is already heavily subsidized, so it's not as expensive in comparison to other countries, for example. So now the question is, if we're going to, it's a question of affordability and accessibility. So maybe re-looking at the policies that we have right now to include more student in need so that they can come and get access to education. I know we have a lot of different types of policies that can be quite protectionist to certain races, right? So which limits that access. But currently education is quite affordable and it can be free. So I think that's one. So accessibility, and the second one is that where's that money coming from? I mean, of course, universal education is great. But there needs to be a lot more nuance to, again, where are these students located? Like, we can't just, again, look at a blanket policy and just, okay, anyone can go anywhere. We're also looking at the kinds of degrees that we're talking about, and then you have to factor in also the merits and their education as well. Like, did they even finish high school for them to enter into university? So I think it's a deeper systemic problem that we really have to look within this community rather than just saying anyone that's B40 can just come in. Because you want them to also graduate and get good jobs. So it doesn't just stop at just, okay, they have a degree, right? So there needs to be a follow through after that.
Right, education is actually a very deep and deeply rooted topic. And I actually want to ask you, so it takes, a lot of political will to sort of reform the education system. Where do we start, you think? What does an ideal education system look like for you?
Okay, well, for me, like most things, it's got a hardware element and a software element. The hardware element is the schools are not in a good state. Physically, the buildings, most toilets are not working well. Kids have been not going to toilet for 6, 7 hours waiting to go home.
Is that still a thing?
That is a thing. That is an absolute thing. I have 51 schools in Subang. During my term, that 4.5 years, I gave each school 80,000 ringgit to repair bumbong, toilet. It's shocking. I mean, I don't know how they even get fire certification, because most of the alarms don't really work. So the schools are crumbling, right? So you need to fix the hardware first, and then the basic things like classrooms are too big. 35, 40 students. The international standard says we need to teach kids in 25. Right? And then each teacher should have a teaching assistant. So these are basic logistical supply that we need to sort out. Then comes the software. That software is complicated because, we have a tradition of rote learning. I mean, Singapore is the champion of rote learning, but they've already started changing in the last 10 years, right? You need to get more critical teaching. But to teach critically, you need to re-educate or at least retrain the teachers as well. So this will take a longer transition. To me, immediate concerns, fix the school. Sekolah Daif should not even happen in Malaysia. One more in Subang, like an urban center area where I still have to fork out so much money to maintain schools. So let's do the physical bit, give the teachers what they need to do their performance, increase the number of classes or classrooms so that the classrooms are smaller. Then have a 10-year program to transition, retraining teachers, better curriculum, more critical like international baccalaureate standards, right? Social services, patriotism for the country, get into that transition. I think we can do well.
I definitely agree in the points of, training teachers. I think that it starts definitely from there. But that is all the time we have on It's About You. Thank you so much for joining us once again. And I'm Saraya Mia. We'll see you again in the next episode.